the next 5 years, because this is an exciting time for all of us. You're in an unbelievably powerful historic site, and these powerful historic sites are tools that we can use to not just remember the past and not just have a memorial to what had happened, both positive and extremely negative, but also to be a catalyst for change. How do we use these spaces and these places to engage that catalyst for change? And don't worry, I can be really loud. So if you're having trouble hearing me, I can be louder. I taught kindergarten. You get to be really loud and very sticky when you teach kindergarten, but it is a great job. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing. When we think about Eastern State, it's always been way more than what people thought it was. They thought of it as a relic of the past, but it's unbelievably more than that. It is a living, breathing space that combines history, it combines education, and all of those things around justice convene here in this space. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. Convening our understanding, convening the work that we will do in education and how we move it forward to establish justice, to find justice, to make us closer to justice. All of those things matter here. And Eastern State is writing the next chapter in the work that we're doing and the stories that we're telling. We've been expanding our educational programming like this. And I love the person earlier that said, wait, do you do all these all the time? Now we do. And they're really important. And we are so lucky that we're doing them with amazing partners. But we're not just ending there. We're doing so much more. Over the last few years, we've made significant strides in ensuring that our team, that our work, is all centered around people with lived experience. We believe that when you do education and when you do the work to tell these stories, you cannot do that work unless you have people with lived experience at the decision-making table, not just weighing in, not just sitting at focus groups, but leading that work. And that's a part of our initiatives moving forward. We have deepened our partnership, but we have a steadfast commitment to this historic site and its preservation, ensuring that this remarkable site stays as a space of reflection, of dialogue, and learning for generations to come. Places like this matter. They are hard places. They are traumatic places. And we cannot let that part of history go. We need to see the whole history to understand where we came from and those echoes of the past that are still happening today, and when we need to make changes on them, and when we need to shut them down and move forward. The foundation of this work began at Eastern State 10 years ago in 2014. In 2014 is when they launched the Big Graph. And if you haven't seen the Big Graph, I really encourage you to go see it. This is a monument to the impact of mass incarceration. It looks at the years from 1900 to present and shows the lives that are impacted by mass incarceration and the years that led to mass incarceration. This was followed 2 years later by Prisons Today. Prisons Today really put the ideas and energy and the economic impact, which is so much of the conversation that's happening tonight, behind the Big Graph and really helped to explain how this affects the economy, affects people, affects families. The story doesn't just end there. A few years later in 2019, the team unveiled Hidden Lives Illuminated, a dramatic public offering of animated films that were made by incarcerated men and women and that were projected on the outer wall of Eastern State, telling powerful stories from the inside, literally out. And that matters. Voices matter, stories matter. And the work that we're doing moving forward is to be more inclusive in that work, to be more immersive in that work, and to share it with the community in Philadelphia, across the state, and across the country. In 2024, just in the last year, we've expanded our workforce development initiatives, including the Preservation Trade Center, including the LEAD Fellowship, providing training and meaningful job opportunities for system-impacted individuals. We launched Justice 101, this is a part of that series, as well as the National Education Fellowship, which is the collaboration for justice education. In 2 weeks, we have 40 teachers coming from around the country to engage in this content with experts so they can take it back to classrooms around the country and ensure that all of our kids are being supported, protected, and ensured that their lives are meaningful and move forward with the highest expectations for every child in this country. Through these programs and these events, Eastern State is not just a place to learn about history, it's a place to build bright futures and make change. We are moving forward with bold purpose, with clarity. We have just finished our strategic plan. We are in the middle of a rebranding campaign that is going to move us through 2029, our 200th anniversary of the site. And I want you to know that you're the first public people to see the new brand, so I hope you like it. We also have spent the last 9 months redefining our mission, clarifying our vision, and clarifying our values, putting all of that together to launch a brand new website that will come out in early June to be the forward-facing vehicle for this entire nation to understand how do we all engage in this work. But here we meet the mission, here, online, everywhere we do. And our mission, our new mission is we preserve America's first penitentiary as a tool to advance public understanding of the criminal justice system and its impact on the lives affected by it to inspire a more just future. How will we do that? We're gonna do it in 5 major ways. 1, we're gonna reimagine the visitor experience here to ensure that we're telling more stories and diverse stories and giving the storytelling so powerful that it's not just about this preservation, but it's about people. We can never forget about the stories of people and individuals and their names. 2, we're advancing historic preservation here so we can use this site for more engagement, to do more with a site of trauma, to reclaim it. 3, we're expanding our workforce development initiatives to be able to build more and to do more impact in our state and our city. 4, deepening justice education in classrooms around the country and in community centers around the country. And 5, looking internally, ensuring that our internal work and our external work are aligned by strengthening our own organizational capacity. And we do all this work, of course, to make an impact, but to facilitate change in our society. All of this matters. So we stand at a critical junction point for Eastern State. It's not just a historic site, it's a platform for change. And we invite you all in every day into the work that we do in all of these areas and into tonight, not just to be here as a participant, but to be here to give us guidance, to give us your thoughts, your feedback, and work with us to expand more. This is our mission, but we don't make societal change alone. Organizations, museums, for-profit institutions, nonprofit institutions, they don't do it without the whole of the community. So we're offering it up to everyone to do this together. So I thank you for being here tonight. And I also want to just say, I am so grateful that this work is being done with such powerful partnerships, because none of this can be done without great partnerships. So tonight, we are extremely grateful to have the amazing partner in Worth Rises. It's a, yeah, I think that's a woo. Worth Rises is a nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to dismantling the prison industry and ending the exploitation of those it touches. Every year, tens of billions of dollars are spent to incarcerate nearly 2 million people, while private prisons are only representative 8% of the nation's prison population. Private corporations exert a significant control over nearly every facet of the prison system, from construction to architecture to healthcare, food services, data collection, labor, the list goes on. And although so many prisons around our country are public entities, when you look closer, and that's what we need to do, look closer, you will see deeply intertwined partnerships between our government and private companies. This is the work of Worth Rising, and this is why we're so grateful for them to be here tonight. So let me introduce to you the 2 first speakers. Bianca Tylek and her team from Worth Rises are in the forefront of dismantling this work of these systems. Please, everyone, welcome Bianca Tylek, the founder and executive director of Worth Rises. So you get a name and a face. Next, joining her tonight is Jesse Crimes, a multimedia artist whose work explores societal mechanisms of power and control with a focus on criminal and racial justice. While serving a 6-year prison sentence, he produced and smuggled out numerous bodies of work, established art programs, and co-created artist collectives. Today, he's the founder and director of the Center for Art and Advocacy, the first national organization dedicated to supporting justice-impacted creatives. We are proud that Jesse is one of our own featured artists here at Eastern State. Your work is amazing, and it's on display tonight. So we please ask all of you to check it out while we're in cocktail hours later. And areas, it's in cell block 8. And now, it is my distinct honor to welcome Jesse to the stage as he reads an excerpt of his book. Please, everyone, welcome Jesse.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? It's nice and cozy in here. I'm excited to be back and to support Bianca's brilliant work, which is incredibly necessary. And so to do that, I'm going to read a little bit of an excerpt that is included in the book, and it's a part of my story. And so it begins with, I spent 6 years in federal prison, earning 40 cents an hour as an art instructor. For an artist, it was the best job I could have, but I didn't make enough money to cover my basic needs in prison. I was fortunate to have friends and family who put money in my commissary account. As my release got closer, I focused on saving my money so that I could survive when I came home. I worked as much as I could and limited my trips to commissary. The day I was released, I had approximately $140 in my account. Not enough to get myself back on my feet, but it was something. To my surprise, my funds were put on a prepaid debit card. I didn't get $1 in cash, which made my first few hours of release difficult. The card also had my prison photo on it, an immediate warning to anyone who saw it that I had just left prison. But the worst part was that the card issuer, JP Morgan Chase, was charging exorbitant fees of these debit cards, which were designed specifically for people leaving prison. There were transaction fees for everything, including a $10 fee for an ATM withdrawal, and there was no way to avoid the fees, and Chase even charged an inactivity fee for not using the card. Incredible. I worked very hard for every penny on that card, and now that I was free, Chase was taking a significant portion of it. I saved all of my documents and receipts and was lucky enough to have a friend who referred me to a lawyer. Without that support, I might have never have challenged a system that's meant to take advantage of already vulnerable people. Eventually, we filed a class action lawsuit against Chase for charging formerly incarcerated people exorbitant fees on a prepaid debit release card. The case was so strong, the bank settled in a matter of months. Chase was required to return nearly $500,000 to the thousands of formerly incarcerated people it stole from, like me. Yeah. Today, I am a full-time artist whose work has been featured in major institutions, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Palais de Tokyo, and MoMA PS1. And as noted in the intro, I'm also the founder of the Center for Art and Advocacy, which supports formerly incarcerated artists across the country with funding and mentorship. And to add to both of these things, we just opened a brand new gallery space in Brooklyn, which is incredible. So our inaugural exhibition had 35 artists who we've funded over the last 7 years, included in the show. It was a great turnout, and the show is up until September 20th. So if you're in New York and in Brooklyn, I highly encourage you to visit it. We have amazing, phenomenal artists that are not just visual artists, but poetry, spoken word, creative writing, filmmakers. It pretty much runs the spectrum of every creative discipline. And if you are interested and in New York, I also have a solo show up at the Metropolitan Museum of Art until, thank you, until July 13th. So you have a little bit of time to catch it before it probably disappears for the next decade. So I hope you get to see it.
Jesse's really humble. I thought he was going to leave out the Met solo exhibition. I was about to be like, Jesse. Hi, everyone. Bianca, for all those I haven't met. And I'm so grateful for all of you for being here, to Eastern State Penitentiary, for having us here. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the book related to Jesse's story that you just heard. When a person is released from prison or jail, the predation of the financial services sector does not stop. Prior to the privatization of financial services, incarcerated people who still had money in their trust accounts at the time of their release would receive it in full at no cost, by cash or check. This might be money they came in with, they earned through work, or that was deposited by loved ones while they were incarcerated. However, today, many prisons and jails entrust financial services corporations with distributing these funds, more commonly referred to as gate money, using debit cards that are issued upon release. Not only do these corporations ignore the challenges of being restricted to a debit card for money in the moments after release, such as paying for a taxi or bus in communities where cashless systems may not be prevalent, but they also rarely disclose the countless fees associated with the use and mere possession of the card. These corporations charge exorbitant fees to access one's own money. For example, people forced to use debit release cards issued by Numi Financial, a leading player in county jails, may be charged a $2.95 fee per purchase, a 95-cent fee for declined transactions, and a weekly service fee of $2.50. Across various vendors, balance inquiry fees can range from 50 cents at an ATM to $3.95 by phone. Even closing an account comes at a cost. Access Correction charges $30 to cash out and close an account. This is one of the few business models in the prison industry that distinctly profits off the act of releasing a person from prison or jail. These corporations are dependent on the churn of people through prisons and jails, and thus they are interested in high arrest and admission rates, shorter stays, and clear pathways back into the system. Consequently, their business model profits most off low-level repeat offenses like drug possession. The high fees charged for debit release cards have been the subject of lawsuits and consumer complaints for years. The vast majority of these cases are brought under state consumer protection laws. Many of these are forced into arbitration, and only a small number have ever been successful. In one case, people formerly incarcerated in the federal prison system brought a class action lawsuit against JP Morgan Chase regarding fees on its debit cards, which settled for more than $400,000 in damages. Thank you, Jesse. Advocates have also called for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and state consumer protection agencies to step in and meaningfully regulate financial services, particularly debit release cards. And while the CFPB has investigated some corporate practices in the space, the lack of regulation has empowered corporations to brazenly charge high fees that bear little relation to the actual cost of the services provided. However, in 2021, the CFPB was successful in fining JPay for its exorbitant debit release card fees, $4 million back to consumers and $2 million as a civil penalty. Unfortunately, this is a drop in the bucket for corporations bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars annually using these predatory practices.
I am back. One more introduction. Now it is my honor to introduce our moderator for the evening, Piper Kerman. Piper Kerman is the author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, Orange is the New Black, My Year in a Women's Prison. Piper collaborates with nonprofits, philanthropies, and other organizations working in the public interest and serves on the board of directors of the Women's Prison Association and the advisory board of the PEN America Writing for Justice Fellowship, Inside Out Writers, Healing Broken Circles, and Just Leadership USA. Please, everybody, welcome Piper.
I think I'm just gonna, oh, right, you're right. Button, button, button. Who's got the button? Hello, Philly. So nice to be here. Go Birds. I invoke the spirit of gritty tonight. Let that spirit lead us towards the challenges we face. I am so excited to be here. Bianca and I just met today. However, when I got an inquiry from the New Press about this event, it was the easiest yes imaginable because I was well familiar with Bianca's work and the work of Worth Rises, which is so smart, so focused, so effective, and we'll get into that more in just a moment. But yeah, it was a really easy yes.
Thank you.
I was happy to say yes. I'm reminded when I got my advanced copy of this amazing book and I started to read through it, I was reminded, my book was published in 2010, and the same year, the New Press published another book, which is called The New Jim Crow. And The New Jim Crow so brilliantly distilled and focused people's minds on the role of race in the American criminal legal system, since long before, prisons were barely a thing, back when the ideas, economic systems, and policies that dominate this country were already in place and feeding into the establishment of the criminal legal system. One of the other central factors in the American criminal legal system is profit. And that is what this book so brilliantly crystallizes. So I encourage everyone to get a copy and dig in. It's both sort of a beautiful, slim volume at 190 pages, but it's also extraordinarily dense with data, with facts, with action items, with stories like Jesse's, like Saleem's. I don't recommend that, as I did, you read it all in one sitting because it's a lot. But I strongly encourage to get your hands on this book. So I want to thank you for writing it. And we're going to talk a lot about all manner of things. But before we do that, I do want to introduce someone else who I just got the pleasure to meet today, but whose work I'm also very well familiar with. Robert Saleem Holbrook is the executive director of both the Abolitionist Law Center, a public interest law firm here in Philadelphia, and it's a community organizing project as well, and its sister organization, Straight Ahead, a legislative and electoral advocacy group. Saleem is a former, quote-unquote, juvenile lifer who served 27 years in Pennsylvania's adult state prisons, including a total of 10 years in solitary confinement, after being sentenced at the age of 16 to life without parole. He was released in 2018 after the Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences without parole for children are unconstitutional. While incarcerated, Saleem began to write extensively on prison abuse, social injustice, state violence, and juveniles charged and sentenced as adults, and saw his work published in Truth Out, The Appeal, San Francisco Bay View, and Solitary Watch. He also co-founded the Human Rights Coalition while incarcerated, a group of people in prison and their loved ones outside, formed to advocate for themselves against the abuses they were experiencing. Today, Saleem sits on the board of the ACLU of Pennsylvania and is a lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania's Penn Cary Law School. He received the Philadelphia Citizens' inaugural A. Leon Higginbotham Social Justice Champion of the Year Award in 2024. Saleem has presented all around the US at conferences and campuses, and in 2023, he traveled to Geneva with a historic delegation of former lifers and family members, and he testified in front of the UN's Human Rights Commission. Following this historic occasion, the UNHRC, the Human Rights Commission, issued a formal recommendation that the United States should pursue alternatives to detention, the cash bail system, speaking of this book, mandatory minimum sentencing, end the use of solitary confinement, and institute a nationwide moratorium on death by incarceration and executions. So Saleem, thanks for being here with us tonight. Yeah, I'm excited. Bianca, I'm gonna read, sorry, everyone wants to read from this book. I'm just gonna read a very quick part of the introduction before I start posing all the questions. This book maps the 12 sectors of the prison industry and details the extraction of wealth from the people who have been most disproportionately brutalized by overpolicing, mass criminalization, mass incarceration, and mass surveillance. It explains how the carceral state has metastasized across our economy and evolved to maintain systems of oppression in the face of shifting public opinion for the benefit of the privileged few. Bianca, can you just tell us, I know that there's a lot of people here who are very excited and love you, including your parents, but for those who are not so familiar with your story, what brought you to this work, right? And what brought you to the work in the first place, and what called upon you to write this book?
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you so much, Piper, for you being here. It is an honor to have you here, so thank you. And same to be alongside Saleem and his amazing work. And yes, I want to say thank you to my parents who are here, who rarely get to hear me speak. Well, I talk a lot at home, as you can only imagine, but, but not about this subject. So, what brought me to writing this book? First, I want to extend an immense amount of gratitude also to my team at Worth Rises, for whom, this research took years. This book really took 7+ years to write. For folks who may have seen our report that we did back in 2020, some of this might feel very familiar. It is a lot of that plus a lot more that has happened over the last 4 years. But really, this book is meant to be an expose of the corporate greed that we see throughout our system and the government complicity or partnerships that make it and allow it to happen. I want to extend also an acknowledgement to everybody in this room who is formerly incarcerated or has otherwise been hit by this system as a family member, because this is a book that is dedicated to you and to people seeing for once what is happening in terms of at least the exploitation that is in this system, that the system is rife with corruption and the collusion of the government in that corruption. And so, my past sort of career, which is always the fun fact in the room, is that once upon a time, I used to be a financial analyst on Wall Street. And, it was there that I developed these skills to build up companies. And I left with that skill set and decided to dismantle them instead. And for me, it was the criminal legal system and the sort of massive fallacy that we all believe that the system is designed to prop us up and prop justice up. But the reality is that the system is designed for the financial windfall and political windfall of so many. And we're seeing that happen in our society right now. People using the criminal legal system, as they have for decades across all parties, as sort of just a tool to build political power, and then for others to build financial power. And it felt like that was a story that needed to be told, that people really didn't have a centralized resource for that particular part of the story. And so that's what brought me to write the book.
Fantastic. So for those who have not yet gotten their little mitts on the book, it is organized by sort of sector or, broad umbrellas of industry, right? I always say all politics are local. That's because I grew up in Boston, Tip O'Neill. But let's stick with that idea that all politics are local, and let's talk about Aramark. Who knows, here we are in Philly, y'all know about Aramark? Bianca, will you tell us a little bit about Aramark?
Sure. Aramark is one of the nation's largest food service providers. It is headquartered here in Philly, which is why we're talking about it. If you took the train into Philly, you probably saw the giant Aramark logo on the Aramark building in the city center. Aramark probably has at some point touched a lot of your lives. And that is because they provide food services in government buildings, in stadiums, in concert halls, in universities. Aramark is a massive food provider, right? Well, they also have a business line that is specifically in prisons and jails. And, you know, a few years ago, as what felt like an FU, I don't know any other way to say that, to our space and to advocates who were challenging the company, they decided to lump in what they call their justice business segment, or prisons and jails, into leisure and stadiums. And so all stadiums and concerts are now looped into their 10K and their annual reports with prisons and jails. And they are the largest food service provider in prisons and jails. And in doing that, they commit some of the largest atrocities in our prisons and jails. Serving food labeled not for human consumption, low grade but edible. And this is food that's then delivered to prisons and jails, and the people who are incarcerated, who are actually often the staff sort of actually preparing the meals, then see and then prepare for themselves and the people around them. They have been sued over and over and over again by people who are incarcerated, their loved ones, even correctional systems, for the harm. They have kind of claimed that water is a source of nutrients and can build, part of the menu. They have served food with rodent feces and body parts, molded, that leads to just horrid. I think right now our popular culture kind of thinks about food in prison as bad, and it's funny. It's not funny. People in prison suffer from foodborne illness over 6 times more than the average person in the population. And that leads to long-term health impacts that obviously plague people who are incarcerated, but also plague our broader society in both social and financial costs when people come home.
I taught in Ohio State prisons for about a little more than 4 years, and Aramark has the contracts in all of Ohio. Saleem, I know you've had some personal lived experience around Aramark here in Pennsylvania, correct?
Yeah, certainly. I want to give a shout out to Eastern State Penn. I grew up around this neighborhood too, so it always feels good to come back to it. I joked earlier, I used to climb these walls as a kid. Then found myself trying to climb out of prison walls for like 20-something years, so it's ironic. But the crazy thing is every day going down the Schuylkill Expressway, I see that huge Aramark sign right off the river. And it's really weird because it's such a giant corporation and they have their footprint in everything. And there's no doubt they look at just prison food as just another line item on their bottom line. But then, I remember when I was in prison, I used to read the prison legal news a lot because I used to do a lot of legal work. And I used to see them like almost jumping across the country to different states. And I used to be like, man, when is this coming to PA? Because one thing about PA's food at the time, it wasn't necessarily the best food, but they gave you a lot of it so you didn't go to sleep hungry. And prisoners controlled the lines on the food, and we controlled the portion. So you could go up to the joint and be like, yo, throw some more of that on there. So, when you went back. But when these companies come in, they dead all that. They're pre-portioned or they portion them in the back. So by the time they get out to the line, you already have your portion. And so what happened in Pennsylvania, I had finally worked my way out of SCI Green. That was a Supermax. I landed at SCI Cole Township. And just my luck, they decided to make that like a pilot run because Amarak came in to the DOC and said, hey, it's costing you guys close to $5 per tray. we could bring that down to like 2 something. And so the DOC looked at that and said, oh, damn, that's a deal. So then they put pressure on their food services saying, hey, look, we're about to privatize this unless y'all could bring the price down. And what we noticed literally overnight is they rolled out this new diet called the heart healthy diet. And one thing I learned about is like when the more an acronym sounds like it's gonna help you coming from like the government or any agency, it's actually not. So this like shrunk our portions in half, and I was at SCI Cole, and I remember we were going down to eat, and we was like, yo, what the hell is this? Like, you could barely be sustained off of this. And they were like, well, that's the point. It's like, we only gotta give you like 2,500 calories a day. So they like broke it down to each meal. Like, that's the amount of calories that you need to just keep moving. And so we got fed up with it. So we all got together and was like, yo, we're boycotting the chow hall for the whole week. And we did it, and we didn't go to eat. And so that really, at the time, I don't know if Bianca was with the DOC, but Wetzel was her boss, and it's a crazy story there, but they came down there and toured the prison and was like, what's going on? And, you know, I went up to him at the time because they had like a whole bunch of guards around him and they were trying to keep us away. But at that time, we was like, yo, we don't got nothing to lose. And I was like, yo, man, what you're doing, this is out of line. This is out of pocket. I was like, at least in the past, we were sustained. You could go to sleep not hungry. This is crazy. And he was like, hey, look, we'll look into it. Well, they did look into it. They locked me up and sent me all the way across the state, put me in the hole, transferred me. But that was our first taste. Now, 3 years later, Aramark won the contract with the DOC, and they have it now. And if you ask people upstate about the food, they'll all say, man, they're starving us. And then to Bianca's point, to show the connection, all of a sudden they roll out so many different items available at commissary. More proteins, more foods. So they expand the commissary, jack the prices up there, cut back on the food to sustain you. But then also, yeah, the human cost is that like a bunch of us got rounded up early in the morning in our boxers, taken to solitary confinement, and transferred 200 miles. And I landed up back at SCI Green in the Supermax because we were like, yo, we're gonna stand up for our dignity, for our rights, right? So that's a local story, but also to Bianca's earlier report, they were fined by the city of Philadelphia for sending the city ghost receipts in the amount of $300,000 for services that they hadn't provided, and the city apparently will just pay a $300,000 receipt until someone said, hey, we're not getting anything in return for these. So they had to reimburse it. But think about that. Think about if I was to send a receipt to a corporation and say, hey, you owe me $300,000. Would I just say, oh, my bad, here's my check, or you could put me on a payment plan? No, I would be incarcerated. I would be locked up. So this feeds not just into the carceral state, but also the lack of responsibility for corporations, because they could get away with this, right? They could just pay that fine. And a fine to a company like Amarak, it doesn't mean anything to them because of their bottom line. So to Bianca's point in her book, we have to make them feel the pinch at their bottom line. And our protests touched on all those areas.
Thank you so much, Saleem. I just wanted to add also that, a lot of this book, yes, talks about corporations, but as I was mentioning, like, the government is complicit in so many of these things and what is happening. And there are just 2 quick examples I want to give that are not necessarily related to Aramark, but related to the just egregious ways that people and the system looks at feeding people. In Maricopa County in Arizona, the sheriff there bragged about being able to feed people who are incarcerated in his county jail for less than they pay the police dogs every day. I mean, less than it costs them to feed the police dogs every day, right? That's their big hurrah. Our people that are incarcerated in this jail are worth less than our dogs are, right? In the state of Alabama, sheriffs over county jails get money to feed the incarcerated population, but every cent they save, they get to personally pocket. There are sheriffs who have multiple homes, right? Vacation homes from simply not feeding people in their jails. And that's legal.
Yeah. A close examination of sheriff's departments is merited to anyone who cares about just poor people, for one thing, because that's who's filling up our city and county jails, but also about taxpayer money and about electoral politics. So I know that when Aramark has been called out on these points, one of their responses is, oh, this is just a very small portion of our business. But in fact, it's, I believe, more than 10% of their revenues, correct?
It's not public because they've lumped it in with leisure. It's actually hard for us to discern what the difference is, but it's billions of dollars. That much we know.
Yeah. So wrap your mind around this. Aramark is one of more than 4,000 corporations in this country which are doing business and which are detailed in this book. So Bianca, I know when I read the book, I've been to 49 states in this great country. I'm coming for you, Arkansas, but I always, any opportunity I have to go visit people in any kind of lockup. I've been to a lot of prisons. I read this book and I was like, what? There were a lot, sorry, yelling in the mic. There were a lot of surprises for me found in this book, and I do consider myself to be a pretty attentive person to these issues and these questions. I am curious, as you were working on this book, what surprises, unpleasant surprises, frankly, or pleasant surprises, awaited you. And, you really, out of those 4,000 plus corporations, what really stood out to you?
Thank you. So first, I'll just say that if you're interested in learning who the 4,000 corporations plus are that are in the prison industry, you can actually visit data.worthrises.org, and you can explore them yourself. There are obviously many, and there's many stories related to these these particular prison corporations. It is vast. It is everything from healthcare corporations that are taking billion-dollar contracts and then denying people any type of care, and people are dying, right? It is the financial services corporations that we were just talking about that are charging exorbitant rates for people to simply transfer money, which you and I can do over Venmo, Cash App, Zelle for free, right? It is the prison telecom companies charging people crazy rates for phone calls, or in some cases, companies that required prisons and jails in their contracts to do away with visits so that they could force people to use their costly communication services, denying a child the opportunity to hug their parent to make money. One that I think is particularly poignant because I think it touches all of our lives is an example in 3M. 3M is a major conglomerate. For those who may not be familiar, they are the company behind Post-its. I'm sure have come across them at some point. 3M is behind, and other than Post-its and paper and a bunch of other stuff, they're a big manufacturer of things like sheet metal and laminates and, sort of raw materials for things like highway signs or license plates. And so 3M is one of the largest raw material supplier into prisons and jails because nearly every license plate in the United States is made in a prison. And so oftentimes when we think of prison labor, we think of, corporations that are using prison labor. We don't think of the people supplying the raw materials for that labor. But to take it a step further, 3M actually helps prisons establish manufacturing plants for license plates. So they have an entire business unit that just helps prisons do that. And then to take it one last step, they then go and lobby to states to increase how often you need to replace your license plate. So if you're annoyed because you're in a state that just recently said, oh, instead of every 6 years or 10 years or when the thing falls apart, now you have to replace your license plate every 4 years. Thank 3M and thank prison labor, because that is the model that this is built on. And not just replacing a license plate, In some states, you only have to have a license plate on one side of your car, back or front. They've also been lobbying to make sure you have to have two, one on the front and the back. And so these things are the prison industry is ubiquitous in our sort of social fabric, and I think we often just don't see it.
I visited the prison in Ohio that makes all the license plates in Ohio, and the guys who were working, for those guys who were being paid pennies, like we were when we were incarcerated workers, they were like very excited to show me, because they were like, look, there's all these skills that we have now to do this. So what this book brings home in such a powerful way is what a Gordian knot the profit motive is, in the ways that it fingers through, certainly the most obvious things like private prison corporations, but also these companies that we think of as innocuous and being the Post-it company. When I was incarcerated, I got sent to prison when I was 34 years old. I had never been in the system before. I was scared. And really, really quickly, during serving my time, it was so apparent to me, within the first month of being in prison, that the most dangerous thing that could possibly happen to me would be to get sick, because that's how bad the access to healthcare is for people who are incarcerated. I know that you, Saleem, had really specific experiences around the provision of healthcare here in Pennsylvania. And I wonder if you'd share some of that with us.
Yeah, definitely. And to speak closer to home too, the license plate and inspection stickers for Pennsylvania are made at SCI Fayette up in Pennsylvania. Prisoners make them. Anyone needs inspection stickers. I got the hookups though, so definitely give it. I got the hookups. Look, healthcare, man. I'll tell you what. Coming home in 2018, I was fortunate that a lot of my personal health problems happened on the tail end, right when I was ready to come home. But healthcare sucks free. You know what I'm saying? I'm a straight. Healthcare sucks now for us that are out here. So you could just imagine how it is on the inside. And it all comes, even out here, it's the bottom line. So just imagine that if you're free out here, if your company's paying for it, I don't care what type of care you got. I don't care if you got gold, platinum, whatever plan you got. You still deal with the runaround. You still have to get on that phone and hassle with the insurance. You got to threaten them, cajole them, whatever. Now imagine if you're a prisoner that you don't have any of that. You don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. You don't have a company representing you. It's terrible. It's terrible. And I'll give you an example of some cases that we had. Mumia Abu-Jamal, we all know him. Controversial, whatever position you have on it. If you're in prison, it's the state's responsibility to treat you with dignity and take care of your health. And also, he should be free. He's been in prison for 50 years. He's one of our clients, so I'll be straight. I'm speaking as we represent him, and I think he should be home. But he's suffering from a host of health issues. And in 2013, he was diagnosed with cirrhosis, right? So he went to get checked up, and they said, yeah, man, this is definitely cirrhosis. And you got a 64% chance of getting advanced cirrhosis of the liver. But you know what, we're not gonna treat you, because we don't treat you until you have liver failure. It's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. The purpose of treatment in medicine is preventive. It should be prevented. And we had to take the Department of Corrections to court, and what we found was that the DOC was like, yeah, we're not gonna treat them because it costs too much. It costs cheaper to treat them at the more advanced stages because they don't live longer. If we was to treat everyone that, from a preventive standpoint, we would be treating, God forbid we gotta actually take care of people, Our objective is to just advance these people to death and give them the minimal treatment possible. And even the court was like, wait, so you're saying you're identifying this ahead of time, but you're not treating it until it gets to advanced because it's cheaper for them to just wither on a little bit longer and die, as opposed, it was like, no, we can't, even the conservative courts appointed by Bush and all of them was just like, yeah, we can't go with that. So we forced the DOC to not just treat him, but thousands of other prisoners, because they were concerned about the bottom line. Another one of our clients, Russell Schultz, again, another political prisoner, very controversial figure, was in prison for 50-something years. He developed glaucoma. So, he went to him and said, hey, yo, and they looked at his eyes and said, damn, yeah, it's bad in this one eye, but it's not bad in the other eye. And we kind of got like a one eye policy, and that is, you could lose one eye because you got the other one, and so you'll be good. And so it was like, are you serious? Like, yeah, it's serious. Like, that's the crazy thing, that they, under oath and their paperwork, it's like, yeah, this is our policy. Like, as a human being, you could function with one eye, so we're not going to treat the other one. We'll let it go bad. And again, the courts was like, actually, no, if it's preventative, you have to treat it. Like, this is just basic, not just decency, but that's your job as a provider. Don't you take a thing called the Hippocratic Oath? And so the DOC, and it's not too dissimilar to out here, because I'm telling you, it's all about the bottom line. It's just in prison, you don't have an advocate, and it's in the dark, and so they could get away with this. And so, yeah, we changed the policy now. So they have to treat your eyes. You don't wait till you get to advanced glaucoma and they pluck one eye out and they say, yo, you got the other one, so you'll be good. Now, if that messes up, we'll figure something out, right? So we were able to stop those. So those are the actual human stories, but it's also, again, the bottom line to these companies. And I'm glad me and Bianca was talking. Yeah, they're going bankrupt because they have so many lawsuits. And that's our job, to bankrupt them. We want to put them out of business. I remember when the state provided health care back in the 90s before this, I was in prison then. I remember co-pays came. We had to get hit with these crazy co-pays. It was in the mid-90s. But yeah, we want to bankrupt them because we want, now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the states is going to be that much better, but we don't want private businesses, and even me personally, free. I don't want the bottom line to determine whether I'm going to get treatment or not for a serious health issue, because they're always going to choose the bottom line.
So, ironically, incarcerated people are the only Americans who are constitutionally entitled to health care. And yet, what is it that you're seeing come through? I mean, again, healthcare is only one of the sectors or industries that is included in this book, but I'm curious what you'd like to share with people about, the specifics of that chapter, and sort of about these bankruptcies too. Like, what about these bankruptcies?
Totally. So people in prison are the only people who have a right to constitutional health care. They're also the only people in the United States who can't call 911. Like, just imagine that, right? That if you ever needed care, if something was wrong, that you couldn't go to a hospital, you couldn't go to an ER, you couldn't call 911, you couldn't ask for help, that the person you have to ask for help of is a correctional officer who's not a trained medical officer. If you're not bleeding out, who is that person to evaluate whether or not you're having a heart attack, whether you have cirrhosis of the liver or something else, right? So you're entirely dependent on this system. And, I love all the work that Saleem's talking about, the importance of these cases that he's bringing, because as he just noted, it's driving them into bankruptcy. But there's something very, very important to note about that. It is actually their model. So in the last 24 months, 3 major private healthcare corporations have filed for bankruptcy. Healthcare in prisons and jail is an absolute crisis right now. These bankruptcies are for one reason and one reason only. It is because they are trying to clean their balance sheets of all of these lawsuits. The first company that filed for bankruptcy with $1 billion in settlements on its balance sheet. $1 billion of medical malpractice settlements for wrongful deaths, for lost eyes, for cirrhosis of liver, for all of those things. The second company, a much, much, much smaller company by the name of Armor Health, filed for bankruptcy with $150 million of settlements on its balance sheet, wiped clean. WellPath, the most recent, the largest prison healthcare company in the country, earns $2.4 billion in revenues a year. Filed for bankruptcy in December with 1,500 active pending lawsuits, seeking to stay all of them and wipe them all off their sheet. And what will they do if the courts allow them to do it? They'll go back to doing this again. And certainly you've heard of all the tort type of bankruptcies, like the Sacklers, right? Like all of the Johnson & Johnsons. There's one major difference between those and prison healthcare companies wiping their tort claims clean. Johnson & Johnson, these other companies, they rely on consumers that have a free market choice to go somewhere else. People in prison do not. So these companies can continue to operate exactly as they have been and continue to do the same thing. And in 5 to 10 years, we'll see them all back in court again with another mountain of lawsuits. Meanwhile, they have stolen billions of dollars from who? Not, in fact, actually people who are incarcerated, but you, taxpayers. They are getting paid billions of dollars and denying people services, and we are paying for that. And so right now at Worth Rises, we are actually intervening in WellPath's bankruptcy. We have assembled a team of lawyers, of impacted families, of unionized workers under the company, of economists, of medical practitioners, of social justice advocates and criminal justice advocates, and gotten in the weeds in that bankruptcy and said, this plan that they're putting forward is not feasible as a new plan because they will be back here. And it is a requirement of this court to only confirm a restructuring plan that is feasible. And so this is an innovative, unique sort of plan or approach that we are taking, but we believe that at some point they need to be held accountable and cannot continue this trend that they're currently operating under.
This is why I love Bianca though, right? Because we be like high-fiving and shit, like, yeah, we bankrupt them, we kicked their ass. And Bianca would be like, yo, it ain't over yet. Like, you know that they're just wiping the books for y'all lawsuits and, you know, they're gonna try and come back under something else. And we'd be like, damn, okay, well, let's get them another time. But I appreciate it though, because she does keep it grounded. And that's why I think you should really read the book, because look, I learned a lot about just bankruptcy, right? You know, you think bankruptcy, like, nah, that's a loophole for, it's not for us, it's a loophole for them. So it's really important to read this book because it's gonna take you into the complexities that, you know, sometimes you don't see.
Yeah, I mean, the bankruptcy point, what you find in this book is, you know, again, there are some very obvious prison profiteers who we can easily point to. It's actually pretty easy to point to Aramark, obviously point to the private prison companies. But when we think about, you know, bankruptcy, this process of like basically failing up, we can look to the highest office in the land if we want to see someone who's really taken advantage of bankruptcy law. Convicted felons everywhere. So I think one of the things that I want you to talk about is the wins, because Worth has some amazing wins, and other advocates all over the country are working on these issues. There is this sort of whack-a-mole aspect to doing this work, which is, you know, I mean, it comes through when you read the book, this sort of insidious reconfiguration of the profit motive again and again and again. It comes through in the book that there are powerful forces in financial industries and the insurance industry, which, you know, do not, you know, occupy the public mind in quite the same way as private prisons, for example. But what can possibly each and every one of us do, or more importantly, what can we do collectively when we work together to combat these powerful forces at work?
So I'll answer the first part, which is that there is hope. This book can be really bleak and dark at moments because, as we're talking about, this is like just, the everlasting kind of line and litany of horrors, right, that this industry commits against people inside. But over decades, impacted people, families, advocates, lawyers have had wins, right? And we've heard about them from impacted people, right? Of the wins, Jesse's win against JP Morgan, Saleem's win against some of the healthcare companies here in Pennsylvania. One of the wins that we've sort of had at Worth Rises over the years is in the telecom space. It's what we're most known for, so everybody in the room is like, yep, we know that. But we have been fighting for years now to combat the $1.5 billion telecom industry. This is an industry that has just relentlessly separated families by monetizing right connection. In New York City, where I live, there is a digital payphone on every other block where you can make a phone call for free anywhere in the country. Why are people in our prisons and jails still paying 6 cents, 10 cents, 12 cents a minute for phone calls? Why? In 2025. This is not expensive technology, right? And so since 2018, we've been pushing for bills to do exactly that, make communication in prisons and jails completely and utterly free. Because not just is it incredibly cheap to do so, but it is actually what drives our safety, right? This industry is not making us safer, no matter what they tell you. It is traumatizing people, it is harming people, it is killing people, it's doing a lot of things. What it is not doing is making us safer. And if we do actually bring people together, allow people who are inside to be connected with their families, not only is it the right thing to do to allow a child to hear "I love you" from the parent, but it also makes sure that they can come home, have a place to stay, have a social network that supports them, have potentially employment, all of those things. And the data and studies have shown over and over and over again that people who are connected to their support system are more likely to come home and stay home and be productive members of society, right? And so we've had a tremendous number of wins. We passed the first piece of legislation in 2018 in New York City, and since then have passed this, thank you, similar legislation, you just wait. Similar legislation in cities and counties around the country. We got that incorporated in the CARES Act in the federal system, which has had free communication since. We have been able to do that now in 5 different states, from Connecticut to California, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Colorado. And to date, 300,000 incarcerated people have access to fully free communication. 2.5 billion additional call minutes between people incarcerated and their loved ones, and over $500 million saved for families, right? Thank you. And today we are continuing those fights at states around the country. We have also passed the largest piece of regulation in the country through the FCC. And that piece of regulation, we expect to save impacted families over $525 million a year. And beyond that, we have gotten pensions to divest from the actual telecom industry. We have removed the executives of these boards from our cultural institutions because they do not get to be there. And in doing all of this work, we have stopped mergers in this industry. We have done a tremendous amount of work. And as a result, the largest player in the field, Securus, is slated to file for bankruptcy in the next few weeks. And that one, I will tell you, is an actual win. But I will be in their bankruptcy court too. Celebrate.
All right. I could ask questions all night about this book, and I could talk to these 2 wonderful people all night, but I don't want to be greedy, because I know we've got some questions here in the room. And I know, I want to acknowledge our virtual online audience. Hello, we love you. We can't see you, but... So yeah, we've got time for some questions, and I don't want you to be shy. We've got a mic, or maybe more than one mic, circling, so just put up your hand if you got a question, and we will get to you.
Okay, thanks for being here. And honestly, what a wonderful crowd on a Thursday night. So many people here, and that's wonderful. I think my question is, how do we get other people to care? I feel like I'm often in spaces where I bring, not me, but people will bring up, right, like the same things that you guys are talking about tonight. And whether it's those in charge of DOC or policymakers or whoever, and they're like, well, they deserve it, they're incarcerated, or to the point of commissary, someone in charge of the DOC in Pennsylvania said something to the effect of, well, they're not choosing the healthy candy, they could be choosing it, but they're choosing the bad candy, you know what I mean? So how do we get people to care that don't care, that aren't here tonight, that don't care about people who are incarcerated behind walls? I'm just curious.
I can start. So look, I think there's a number of ways, right? Like one is we have to be realistic about who we're trying to convince, right? Like our audience isn't everyone. There is just a reality that there are some people we're never going to reach, right? That being said, there is sort of this big group in the middle of people that we like, you know, as advocates, we would call like persuadables, right? Like folks who we think are movable, can be educated, and simply in many cases don't know. But I would also say even people who are impacted sometimes don't register what exactly is happening to them and how. And I'll tell you a quick story. I worked with an incredible woman, but when I first met her on a campaign to make phone calls free, Diane might be watching actually. Diane is also in the book. And Diane, when we first met, her son was in prison, and he was also a youth that was sentenced at 17. And what she said was like, as a mom, you don't just stop being a mom because your, child's inside. But one of the things when I talked to her about this campaign to make phone calls free, that she said to me, was she had this like epiphany that she was like, wow, I didn't even think about the fact that that was like why I can't afford other things, right? And to take it a step further, she's like, I never even thought to ask for that to like be free. And so I think we have to not just educate people on the issues, which is a lot of what we're trying to do in this book, and through our work. We need to outrage people, right? But we also need to show people what solutions are possible and the like hope that we can create, and tell these stories of the wins that people have had, so that people feel like they can step into something and be part of something that will change it, and not just be part of something that's miserable, right? We are all faced every day right now with misery and chaos and a lot going on. And what we need to be talking about the stories of hope and solutions and the ways that we can get there. Because I think that's likely to bring more people in than just like wallowing in what's dark and heavy.
I would say, if you read this book, no one could ever take action on everything that's included in this book, but there's something in this book that almost everyone will experience some resonance, because it's relevant to their own lives in some way. And that question of relevance, is really at the heart of it. And there's a lot that's relevant in here. Good question, though. I mean, the nature of our challenge, right?
We have one from a virtual visitor.
All right.
So Hope wants to know, in regards to healthcare, is there a difference between public and private prisons?
It's actually, Hope, thank you for your question. I think you're on that camera over there. I'm going to reframe your question a little bit. The issue is not necessarily private prisons versus public prisons. It is privatized care versus public care. Because even in publicly operated prisons, you have privatized care. So while only 8% of the prison population is in a private prison just means that the entire prison is operated by a private company. More than 50% of states have privatized care, which means they've outsourced specifically healthcare, even if the prison itself is run by the government or government employees. And that being said, to answer that question, the answer is yes. Public care is better than private care, albeit to Saleem's point, not great and not perfect, but it is better. But there is one more important thing about the reason why shifting from private option to public option is important, and that is transparency. When you are operating with a private company, there is no transparency. They are not susceptible to public records requests like FOIAs and other things. They really, really harness sort of all of their information. On top of that, they have a gazillion investors and private equity firms, hedge funds, all these things, and everyone's got to get a piece of the pie, right? Everyone's got their hand in the cookie jar. And so the idea is remove the hands from the cookie jar, operate at no margin, because you don't need to, and have transparency so that advocates can actually advocate towards better policies and government practices, which you cannot do with private corporations. And so for all those reasons, the public option is the option that we would encourage folks to move towards.
And also, the scrutiny, like in Pennsylvania, in one of the cases, one of the lead defendants from the private healthcare provider, the doctor was like, had their license suspended in like 6 states and was operating in this state without a license, right? So they were able to get around the requirements. Another case, a major problem in Pennsylvania's prison is, I could just recall SCI Green, the lead doctor for that prison was a trauma surgeon. So if you had a catastrophic injury or something like that, he was great to go to. Like he'll put the gloves on right there and you'd be like, yo, you ready to do this now? He'd be like, yeah, let's go. But it was great. Like, trust me, he was good at his work, but God forbid you got cancer, or God forbid you got something that like they got to send you out, because his whole thing was like, I don't see any damage, here's some Tylenol, go back to the block. Whereas though if it was public, they would have full range of services for you to be, he'll send you out for an MRI. They'll actually do what doctors do for that field. And it was vice versa. You could be at another prison and there'll be someone else with different qualifications, because they're not trying to have a full staff on complement. They're really just trying to, again, maintain the bottom line. So those are some problems too.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that ambulance thing, with the WellPath case that we're working on right now, we have talked to union staff at this company and their representatives who have said very clearly that they were discouraged from calling an ambulance for people who are incarcerated in their facilities, and that they would wait until their supervisor left the prison or the jail before calling an ambulance. And one of the groups of vendors, unsecured creditors in this bankruptcy, are all the ambulatory services companies that never got paid. They not only took billion-dollar contracts from states like Georgia and Michigan, but then left them with multi-million-dollar bills for ambulances that they didn't pay while they're filing for bankruptcy.
Enraging. Okay. In the back, guys, a gentleman has had his hand up for a hot minute. Here comes the mic.
Thank you so much for this engaging conversation. As someone I'm a physician myself, and as someone who's done this research in prison spaces, one of the things that's really alarms me is how hard it is for a prisoner to sue on their own behalf, particularly since due to the Prisoner Litigation Reform Act. And so I'm going to speak a little closer. Yeah, okay. But the Prisoner Litigation Reform Act has made it a lot harder for prisoners to sue on their own behalf. And I was wondering how you guys actually get around that and are able to advocate on behalf of prisoners. Also, one of the tensions here is what you mentioned, is that these states are drawn towards privatization because it's cheap. And how do you communicate, particularly in healthcare, when you see all these alarms going off that healthcare is getting more expensive, how do you communicate to states and the public payers that yes, it's expensive, but it's also a constitutional right? Even if that means removing yourself, extracting yourself from the private equity space.
I can answer the second question, Saleem, if you want to take the first question on lawsuits. So on the second question about privatization being cheaper, that's actually not true. That is a narrative. It is a myth. It is something that the sector really wants you to believe. And I actually will use a private prison example to answer that, and one from right next door to where we are. Delaware County, Pennsylvania, their county jail was actually a private prison for many years. Geo Group ran that facility. We worked with that county and their county commission to deprivatize their jail and to turn it back into a public option. For many years, they were saying, well, like, it's cheaper this way. We don't really know how else to like do it. And it's going to be a big lift essentially to take this back public. Turns out it's now cheaper for them to run their jail completely like in-house as a public option than it was, and how much they were paying the Geo Group at the time, the private prison operator. And I will just say, our president right now himself in an interview recently said private prisons are really expensive, and it was his excuse for sending a bunch of people to Guantanamo. So in many ways, I think that's just something that like they want you to believe. And once you start cutting them a check, you don't really have anything to compare it to, right? Because now you've outsourced it all, and there's no, other side of it. And once you're doing it for 5-10 years, you really have no concept of what it would cost if you were doing it in-house yourself. All those people I mentioned that have their hand in the cookie jar, they take a lot. They need a lot. It's not like these are not public utilities, right? When you think of like a private equity firms require massive margins to operate and then pay all the limited and general partners that exist in that ecosystem. So if they're doing it at that rate, then you should expect that they're actually spending far less on the actual care, and that doing it yourself is probably not as expensive as it comes off.
Sending them to Guantanamo also strips them of constitutional protections too. That's another reason to send them there. And the Prison Litigation Reform Act, man, you must have had many sleepless nights with that, John. It's really crazy. There's no getting around that, and it was designed for that. And just some backstory on that, the Prison Litigation Reform Act was passed in 1996, 2 years after the 1993 crime bill came into effect in 94. And the reason why it came about was because the country had invested so much in this massive prison expansion where they were going to incarcerate 2 million people. But they also knew that, these incarcerated people have constitutional protections. So how can we get around this? Because we're ready to cage them at a scale that we have never done before in history. So we have to close off their access to the courts to prevent these so-called frivolous lawsuits, which were actually prisoners fighting for their constitutional rights and fighting against abusive conditions, overcrowding, healthcare. So that's how the Prison Litigation Reform Act, its whole purpose is not to reform, it's really to keep you out of court. So you can't get around it. One of the ways that we deal with it, though, is we flood the prisons with know your rights material. We make sure that if a prisoner or someone incarcerated reaches out to us about a constitutional violation or an issue they're having, we say, okay, hold, stop what you're doing. Make sure you file a grievance. We walk them through the steps to file the lawsuit. So yeah, it's a horrible lawsuit. We've been criticizing Trump here too, but I'm someone that will say clearly that mass incarceration in this country was a bipartisan effort. It's the residue of Clinton and Biden, and it's something that not repealing it really squandered an ability of the past president to rectify that madness from the 90s and create and remedy some of this injustice. So yeah, the long story short is you have to deal with it. There's no getting around it.
One of the things you'll find in this book is a fascinating concrete example of how the profit motive has been baked in for a really long time, but how mass incarceration policies supercharged profit taking from the people in our communities, the people in our society who are already most vulnerable and most struggling just to get by. And that is a necessary and a beautiful thing. So I want to thank you, Bianca. I know before I let us all go to have some cocktails and mix and mingle and chit and chat, I want to make sure that everyone leaves this room and all of our virtual folks, at home know how they can actively get involved, both specifically with Worth and, more broadly in their own communities, wherever those might be.
Sure. And Saleem, I welcome you to add to this too for ALC. So for Worth Rises, obviously get a copy of the book. Let's start there. Then make sure, if you're interested in this kind of information, which I assume if you're here, this is the kind of information you like to get, other than the people who are obliged to be here because you're related to me, then I would follow us on all the social media platforms, right? At Worth Rises on Instagram, on the thing that used to be Twitter, Blue Sky, all of those. We are talking about these things all the time, and not just educating, but also providing opportunities to take action and to do, what you can do. There are also multiple campaigns that we have going on right now, like the End the Exception campaign. We didn't get into that today, but the campaign to end the exception in the 13th Amendment that still allows for the enslavement of people who are incarcerated and, incarcerated. And so if you visit endtheexception.com, you can actually right there in a 30-second action, reach out to your congress member and ask them to take action or to support a bill that we have in Congress. And then we have campaigns locally, for example, things like our Connecting Families campaigns. Those are all our campaigns to make communication free in prisons and jails. We are in, I think right now, over a dozen states. So more than likely, we are in a state that has a campaign where you might be, including Pennsylvania. There is work being done here. So, there are so many ways. I guess the last one I'll say is, take a look at where you're invested and where people related to you are invested. That list of corporations is a really good tool to look at your own portfolio. We also do license that data to multiple providers who work with financial advisors. So if you have a broader portfolio or a bigger portfolio and you have a financial advisor, tell them to use the screen that InvestNet has that has been built off of our data on this issue. So there are many ways. As we were talking earlier, right? In the same way that prisons are not the solution to all of the myriad of issues in our society that, sort of our social fabric uses them to be, there's not one solution to the prison industry. This was an industry that was built over 40 years, and frankly, longer than that, but in its most modern form. And it's going to take a lot of different actions to get it out of here.
Amen. All right. Thank you. Oh.
No problem. One thing I would say right now, on some of our pressing issues, that if you're in Philadelphia, on May 20th, we have a ballot question for the Prison Oversight Board here in Philly. And a lot of these questions that we're talking about today and these issues that we're talking about today, the purpose of the Oversight Board is to resolve these questions of inadequate health care for people on the inside, deteriorating facilities. So vote yes to that. That's the first. I'm gonna do my pitch. Make sure you vote yes to that ballot question to establish, because accountability and transparency should apply not just to governments, but also corporations. So this conversation is relevant, and especially in this era now where we're seeing them two merge in a way that is more transparent than it's ever been, and basically daring us to do something about it. So on May 20th, you could do something about it here in Philly and vote for that independent jail oversight board, because we need to hold the county accountable for what's going on in the jails. And also, it's a financial standpoint, is that we successfully sued the city and won a $25 billion contempt of court violation on the city because they didn't bring the conditions up to speed. And look, that's our money, right? That is being wasted there and is being doled out in these settlements. So the oversight board would stop that. The other thing I would say, and just to do the social media plug, would be, you can find us, Abolitionist Law Center, go online. We have actually a sign-up form that you could sign up and plug into our multiple campaigns. So we have many campaigns around death by incarceration. We have government accountability campaigns and ending solitary confinement campaigns. community advocacy. It's a lot. And if you want to plug in that way and come to our meetings, you could donate. We always need money, especially the Abolitionist Law Center, because we don't take money from power. We prefer to push power, move power. So those are ways that you can support us in this fight.
Yeah, always donate. Donate to Earth Rises too.
Donate, donate, donate. Indeed. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Saleem. Again, I could talk all night, but we all need to get to work reading this book, for those of you who have not read it already. And thank you all for making time in your very busy lives to come out and talk with us.